5:30. I believe the button has been pressed in the AV room. So therefore, given a few changes on tonight's agenda, I would like to call to order the November 7, 2019 Sign Code Board of Appeals.
Okay, so we will go ahead and do attendance. Shipley, Clark,
Present?
Gardner, Shalinski,
Present.
Wampler, Weisner,
Here.
Harry.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Excellent. This is the first time I've used the Civic Web stuff. Is there any advice on jumping to the other agenda? Is there
One,
On the same one, you scroll all the way out.
push
oh,
agenda.
got it. Okay.
Can I do this right? And then collapse this. And now.
Great. So are there any communications that need to come before the board this evening?
Other than the deferral request earlier.
Okay. Do we need to disclose any ex parte communications or abstentions from any particular items?
No.
No. And then can you let us know which one has been deferred?
Yes, so the first item on the Sign Code Board of Appeals, the freestanding sign at 6th Street and George Williams Way. The applicant sent a written request earlier this afternoon requesting to be deferred.
Great. All right. Then that eliminates all items on the public hearing. So we'll move on to miscellaneous. Are there any other things to come before the board this evening?
Nothing.
Okay. Then I would move to adjourn the Sign Code Board of Appeals.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, meeting adjourned. Then I will now open the November 7th, 2019 Board of Zoning Appeals. Can we have a roll call to determine if there is a quorum?
Shipley, Clark,
Present?
Gardner, Shalinski,
Present.
Wampler, Weisner,
Here.
Harry.
Here.
We have quorum.
Great. Do you have any communications to come before the board this evening?
Similar communication, deferring the first item, B-19-00453.
Great.
It's associated with the Sign Code Board of Appeals item.
Okay. Do we have any disclosure of ex parte communications or abstentions for the remaining agenda items?
No.
No. Great. And you've already announced the one that will be deferred. So I will then open up the public hearing portion, moving down to item number 2, request for a variance at 5100 Cody Court. We will hear from staff.
Good evening, board members. My name is Catherine Week, one of the planners presenting this item for you tonight. The variances request is arising from the applicant's desire to modify an existing deck that encroaches on the setback, the rear setback. Article 6 of the Land Development Code, specifically Section 2601, expresses the dimensional standards for setbacks. The rear yard setback, or the rear setback for the RS7 zoning district where this property is located, is 30 feet. And so I'm going to briefly go through the 5 criteria. I won't talk a whole lot about 2 and 4, primarily because staff came to the opinion that number 2, concerning the rights of adjacent property owners or residents, that staff's opinion was that the variance would not adversely affect the rights of adjacent property owners. And number 4, concerning potential adverse impacts to the surrounding area, staff's opinion was also that it did not feel that this variance request would have an impact or a negative effect upon public health, safety, morals, et cetera, in that criteria. So I won't talk a whole lot about those. I'll talk primarily about 1, 3, and 5. Question number 1 revolves around the uniqueness caused by zoning or platting. This particular lot was platted and recorded in 2002 as Lot 8, Block 1 of West Wood Hills 3rd Plat. The detached dwelling was built in 2007. The parcel came into existence under a previous zoning code, the 1966 zoning code, and was zoned RS2 at the time. That zoning district also required the 30-foot rear setback. The RS2 zoning district converted to RS7 with the adoption of the Land Development Code in April of 2006. The house was constructed under this new Land Development Code, as I said, in 2007. And so the RS zoning district requires that same 30-foot rear setback that was required in the RS2 zoning district. So there was no change in zoning requirements in relation to setback from the time the lot came into inception and to the time that the house was constructed. Planning and Development Services staff was able to locate the building permit for the house and deck. The deck was shown on the submitted plot plan that was associated with that building footprint. And on that plot plan, the deck conformed to the setback standards.
We're going to interrupt you for a
Yeah.
second. At least two of us up here can't seem to get this to load on our machines. These guys seem to be doing okay.
It stops at page 1.
Yeah, I get page 1 of 5.
Let's do this. Let's go here, collapse this. So then come on. And undo the HTM. Let's do PDF.
Yeah, we get
Well, do the
Oh, yeah.
HTM.
maybe this staff report here. Oh,
Mine loaded when
It'll load, but just only goes to the first page.
yeah, that's weird.
Let me see if I can pull it up here too.
I did the HTM version.
Have at it.
Huh.
It just does that.
We got our IT people here.
So I can get the staff report on the large monitor
yeah,
also.
that'd be great. While we try
Uh-huh.
and navigate
And
this.
if you let me know about which page you want it on, I can scroll.
Would this be a good time to say that technology is its own trap?
Yeah, this is the first time we're using this iCompass format, so
So the night that we go to live
yeah, there is a little
YouTube
bit of a learning
broadcast,
curve.
we
Yeah.
also can't get our,
It was awesome reviewing it today. I will say that. It's just the
yeah, it worked at home.
we'll just blame the iPad. Let's blame Apple.
Yeah. We'd ask staff to write a strongly worded letter to Apple.
When this loads,
It was up. I didn't do
when
anything.
this loads, you'll have an option of a full agenda or
Uh-huh.
click the full agenda on the right side of the screen.
The agenda packet.
Yeah, that'll give you all the attachments.
That's what I did
Yep.
last time too.
And then let me know when you're ready and I'll keep going.
Oh. Oh, we have Wi-Fi, it's just very slow. Go ahead, keep going.
Okay. So as I was saying, Planning and Development Service staff was able to locate the building permit that was associated with this particular house and deck. The deck was shown on the submitted plot plan, and the footprint of the deck conformed to the setback standards for the district. At some point after the issuance of the building permit, the deck was built larger than what was approved on the building permit and encroaches on the setback by the amount that's shown on the survey that has been attached and provided by the applicant. While it may be unfortunate that the deck was enlarged and constructed in a manner that encroaches on the setback, the hardship that this may pose to the applicant is not due to conditions which were unique to the property or ordinarily not found in this, the district, same zoning district. If the deck had been built in accordance with the approved building permit, it would have been in compliance with that minimum rear setback, and a variance would not be required for the modifications and enclosing a portion of the deck that they're asking for. Moving on to criteria number 3, which concerns the unnecessary hardship. Staff believes that adherence to the city code does not constitute an unnecessary hardship. The deck did not come into existence legally under the previous or current zoning code requiring that 30-foot setback. There are ways that the deck could be modified to comply, and the original deck was approved at approximately 10 feet in depth, which is still usable for a deck, and would have complied with that 30-foot setback. The deck on the provided on this, as shown on the survey that's been provided, shows that the deck was constructed to a greater depth than was on the original building permit and does encroach on that setback. Requiring this subject property to comply with existing standards would still permit a deck designed in accordance with the setback requirements, and though this may now be a hardship requiring additional modifications to be made, it does not constitute a definition or rise to the level of unnecessary hardship, nor does it deprive the owner of any rights to utilize their property as permitted by zoning. As you're aware, the board cannot take into consideration financial arguments, and there may be other alternatives that the applicant has that would bring this into compliance. Question or criteria 5, concerned with whether or not granting the variance would be opposed to the general intent or spirit of the code. In staff's opinion, granting the setback variance would be opposed to the general spirit and intent of the land development code. Granting the variance is not consistent with previous findings of the board. The deck did not come into existence legally, and though the applicants are looking to continue that and utilize that deck at the depth and footprint that it has been constructed in, the deck was not built according to those approved plans. Through the granting of variances, the board has the power to equalize the process of development. Approving this variance is granting an additional benefit to the property owner to utilize an area within a setback that surrounding property owners may not have. And it's permitting the owner to overdevelop the property in a manner that is not consistent with the intent of the code. Staff's analysis of the variance application overall finds that it does not meet all 5 conditions set forth in the Land Development Code under 20-1309, and therefore recommends denial of the variance to reduce the setback from the 30 feet to 26.16 feet as requested in the variance. And I'm not sure if I mentioned, but this property is located at 5100 Cody Court. So, and I'd be happy to scroll through the staff report if you need an image or certain section that you need to.
We did, we got it.
I
Did you
got
get it? Okay.
Loading
I'm going to
that-
back up to
the
the
full packet.
agenda then, so. Okay. And I'd be happy to stand for questions if you have them.
Any questions for staff?
Yeah, and maybe this would be a better question for the applicant. You stated that the original building permit showed a deck and that this was not in compliance with the original building permit. Did the current owners build the deck, or was it done by a previous owner?
The applicant would probably have to answer whether or not, I believe they purchased it as new construction, but whether they owned it at the time it was constructed or they purchased it after, the applicant would probably have to answer that question.
Okay.
I can also, just note that things sometimes do change between the issuance of a building permit. So it may or may not have been there, or the deck may not have been completed at the time of completion of the building permit process, or even at final inspection. But somewhere in between that issuance of the building permit and now, that deck came to be in a dimension that was not represented on the building permit.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm looking at images 2 and image 3, and I was paying originally a lot of attention to the back side of it there. How accurate is that satellite photo? Because the house doesn't line up as it does
Well,
in the
it's
plan.
fairly accurate. I would say that the survey is more accurate
More
than
accurate,
our
yeah.
aerial pictometry. The survey is actually done by a surveying company, and I would rely more on the survey than I would on the aerial
Okay.
photography.
And that survey, how does that
It's very close. If you look at the image 2 and image 3, you can kind of see the first dotted line that appears to go through the stairs on the deck in a slight corner on the survey. That blue shaded area in the aerial is very close to what's represented on the survey.
Yeah.
So they are close. I wouldn't say they're identical, but it does give you an idea that the survey is very representative of what is on the site, so.
Yeah, my observation was just like, imagining that the deck was designed to be 10 feet deep or something like that. That maybe it is actually 10 feet deep, it's just the house
No,
is.
you can scale the image off. The deck is more than 10 feet.
Right,
yeah.
whatever it was designed to be,
Yes.
was the house placed 2 feet too far back or something
Oh, I
like
see what
that?
you're saying. Is the house in the same
In the correct
location?
place, as it was
Um,
intended to be.
Well, you can look at the front of the survey. Also, there's a front setback line as well and a front shaded area. It doesn't look like the front overhang is shown, but the bump out towards the southeast is kind of depicted, and it's similarly aligned with
Yeah.
the front setback, so it is close.
It's close.
But, yeah.
Okay. Just out of curiosity. All right, any other questions for staff? All right, thank you very much. At this point, we'd like to hear from the applicant if they're here this evening.
We did buy the house from the builder. It was already constructed when we purchased it, and I think it passed I know that it passed all inspections. And so I guess I'm just surprised that there was a problem with it. And then when we started in this process, that's when we found out that it was over the, whatever line that is, the dotted line, that we were supposed to go over. We have gone out and talked to our neighbors, and it's all green space behind it, so there's never going to be anybody behind us because of the green space that's back there. So we just feel like I guess we don't understand why, if it got approved to begin with, how it can't be approved again.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant this evening?
Yeah, this came up because, not because it was there, but because you're proposing to alter it by doing an enclosure.
Yes,
So that enclosure would take up the entire deck, or does it just include the part that is within the 30-foot setback?
it includes the entire deck,
Okay.
I believe. My husband's not here to, I'm sorry. But yes, it includes the whole deck.
Do you know about when this house was built?
In 2007.
And you were the original owners of the house?
Mhm.
And
We
you
bought it
did,
in 2008.
yeah, you bought into that, and you did not make the addition of the stairwell going off of the deck? It
No, it was already built.
was all in place?
Normally, when people purchase a house, they have various documents that are required by the lender, including like survey documents, et cetera. I'm wondering if you can remember, did you commission a survey to be done, and was that part of the whole package at the time?
I would assume so. I don't know. My husband did it. and
Okay,
so-
thanks.
Any other questions for the applicant?
No, but I'd have a question for staff, if we could.
Yeah.
And this is a little, throwing the net a little broader than our applicant here, but I think I've been on the board for a year now or something like that, maybe it's like right on a year. It seems like there's been a few times where we've sat here and an applicant comes in wanting to do something, and then as part of the process, we find out that, and we never know for sure. Here it looks a little bit more clear because this was in 2007, so it's in, not very attenuated by time, but we discover that a builder looks like they, were building something and then took some liberties within the code. Oftentimes, we can't find the permit either. Here, we found the permit, and we can see, here's the permit that was granted. Here's what was built. Yes, I mean, there's some real clear demarcations here. It's like, here's the permit that the builder had. Here's what we have, the finished product. But yet, we've had other instances where builders are on site and they're doing things and kind of, so I just want to make sure I see you nodding your head, like you agree. We've seen these things before.
You have seen them before. The difference, again, is the timing. So some of those older permits that are pre-2000s, they're different system, different documentation system, sometimes different final inspections required different levels of finish. Maybe the stairs were not on the deck at the time of final inspection. Those things can happen. Prior to, I guess, 2012, we switched to the city switched to a different system. So a lot of those earlier 2000 permits were transferred and scanned in. So we have better documentation of those, which is the difference in what you're seeing now is really because it's been more recent. We have more accurate documentation as to what transpired.
Yeah, I mean, we can establish a greater chain of what happened.
And one other point of note is those other ones that you've seen that may or may not have been somewhat similar, there was a change in standards associated when those zonings shifted. So like when one zoning code transferred over to another, some of those standard numbers have changed.
Right.
In this case, this one is identical.
Yeah.
The standard from the old code and the standard from the new code is the same. So,
Yeah,
that's kind of
Yeah.
where we landed on that as far as staff's analysis.
right.
Okay. Anything else for the applicant? Thank you very much. At this time, we can open it up for public comment. If there's any comment this evening about this, step up, introduce yourself.
Rod Lang. I know of the house and Westervelt. I can tell you that if you were to look at an aerial of this, very few people can even see it. And I would understand if there were people that were back directly to them and crisscrossed this way and that way, but they're back to a pond and woods beyond that. And that's, if that bears any, consideration, I would take note of that. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Not seeing anybody else stepping up, I'd entertain
I
a
have a letter from our neighbor. I think she faxed it in to you.
She actually, they did fax it in. They also dropped it off to their office, and it is in your packet. That
Cool.
communication was included. So, yeah.
And the HOA. I got it included on the HOA that approved it also.
Okay, thank you. All right, seeing nobody else stepping up, I'd entertain a motion to close the public portion of the con.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, discuss. What do you guys think?
Okay, I'll go. If this were an original application of somebody coming in here right now and saying, I want to do this, I would be looking at it and saying, okay, this looks pretty reasonable. It's like less than 4 feet. It doesn't impact anybody negatively. It enhances quality of life, no big deal. The trouble that I have with it is that we're basically saying that people can come in with an approved plan, do whatever the heck they want, whether or not it's in compliance with the plan, and then years later, we kind of have to say, okay, it's all right that you didn't follow the rules. And that's troubling to me because it kind of sets a tone that this is the way that business is done, that people can do anything they want to do, and we're going to look the other way. And that is, that's why I have trouble with it. And I recognize that it was not this individual that did that, but where is the recourse against the one that did do it? And where is the deterrent for other people just doing this in the future and getting away with it? I've not made up my mind, but that's my concern. And I'd be real interested what other people think.
I have a question for staff. On a Lawrence residential building permit, is there a separate inspection and stamp for deck work?
It's not a separate stamp. If it's presented as part of the overall building permit, when the house is originally constructed, it would be part of the footing inspections or the final inspections, or that type. It would be part of that overall review.
Okay. Gentlemen, any other thoughts?
I've said before on this board that I'm sensitive to situations where people that were formerly in compliance become out of compliance because of code changes or something, or where we have a piece of property that was outside the city then is incorporated into the city and they become out of compliance. And I've, raised a fuss over that, I think, a couple times. But here, so I too am troubled because I understand that our applicant here didn't do this, but at the same time, it's kind of presented to us as a fait accompli. Where we had a builder, the builder knew the rules, the builder had an appropriate permit in hand, and then still just, took some liberties on the building site and built over the setback line. And so I'm sitting here thinking, for my principles here, because in those other instances, I've voted against staff recommendation, and I've said, well, it's because, our applicant isn't really the person that caused this. Something came to them. But here we're kind of presented with a fait accompli, where it's like, well, here it is. So, please give us your okay so that we can go on. But I'm distressed that this builder has created a situation that puts the applicant in a bad spot.
I've been looking at it from the point of view of like, is there an expectation that when a city employee grants that final approval, that there is an underlying thumbprint that everything is, as it is built, is acceptable. and if they didn't catch the fact that it was 26.1 feet instead of 30 feet from the rear setback, that speaks to the just how insignificant or unnoticeable of a error this would be.
Yeah, and that's 48 inches. That's the stairs, but most of this is actually probably, what, a third of that distance from the setback, if you look at the image 2.
And that's kind of where I'm landing, is just, is there an underlying assumption that when you buy a building that is within city limits that has been approved,
I mean, especially when it's brand new.
when it's brand new?
Yeah, I mean, and the city's had to issue an occupancy permit, right?
We didn't check for occupancy permit, but I believe we were issuing occupancy permits in 2007.
Right.
Yeah.
So now you're getting into some contract law there, you know.
Wherein if the city employee had done their job thoroughly, would have called the builder out and said, hey, this is not in compliance, the builder would have remedied the error prior to sale to the applicant, and we wouldn't be here this evening.
And not to beat up, you know, on the inspector that went out there, but I mean, the variance is essentially de minimis. I mean, the stairs is really the thing that sits on the wrong side of that setback, but the rest of it is just, there's, the north and south edges of the deck are barely over.
In the deck itself, is it even gonna be over this? I mean, it's not gonna be over the stairs, is it? I mean, I'm assuming it's just over the
There's
rectangular.
a corner, if it's at an angle.
Yeah.
So it hits the stair and then it kind of cuts the corner of it as well. So it is small.
I'm
but
just
it
talking
is-
about the deck portion of it.
Yeah, the
Oh,
deck portion
right.
comes within 27.59.
The real
It's
issue,
just
though, that
right?
Yeah.
Basically.
brought this here was the desire to enclose it. And I wonder if we could approve of an enclosure that's within the 30-foot setback. I mean, it would create an odd little corner that wasn't enclosed, but
We can.
that would seem to accomplish the purpose that the applicant is here for.
So the board can grant a variance for what was requested,
Mhm.
or they can grant a variance for less than that,
Mhm.
less than the ask. So if the, do you have the exact number in front of you?
We can condition the request.
Yes, it's basically you can approve, modify, or deny.
So
But
you
you
could,
can't grant more than they requested.
Right.
I
does that
mean,
answer your question?
yeah,
Okay.
I mean, clearly, I'm not interested in making them tear the whole thing down. That would be ridiculous. And if the issue was enclosing what was there, then I'm wondering if that makes sense, and I'm proposing that maybe it does, to approve an enclosure that is within the 30-foot setback, which pretty much is everything except maybe a few inches other than the stairway. floating that to see if there's any support for that idea on this board.
What is, so I'm, sorry, I'm just thinking here. I think Barry's got a point. At the same time, if the actual, what the enclosed, the part would be, that really the only part that's over the 30-foot is that little sliver, I guess, on the west side of the property, because the stairs wouldn't, I'm assuming, wouldn't be enclosed. I mean, is it just, I mean, are we creating a issue whether we, I mean, if basically where I'm getting at is conditioning it, are we better off just approving it? That's the, in summation.
Well, I mean,
It's such a, I mean, we're talking,
yeah,
that
we could ask for a plan, but since the variance sticks with the land and not necessarily the deck addition, that doesn't matter to me too much. I don't know. Does anybody want to take a shot at a motion? Should we go through the items one by one? I have no problem with number one, in that it is unique to the property and that we were dealing with a deck that was approved and inspected and approved and purchased at a later date by the owner. And yet it was out of compliance. So I feel like that is hopefully unique inside the city of Lawrence, and that there aren't a bunch of new buildings being built and approved that are not up to code. And I don't feel like that is an action of the applicant at all. That happened prior to them entering the picture. Does that work for everybody else?
Just want to jump in very quickly and just remind you that the uniqueness, hopefully it is unique, this situation, but the uniqueness that we're looking at is due to zoning or platting. Maybe not so much the permitting process at the time of construction, or how it came to be, if that makes sense.
So staff has already signed off on number 2, right? Is it that what?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would not adversely affect the property
yeah,
owners.
they said 2 and 4 were not, is 1, 3, and 5.
It's 1, 3, and 5.
And 5 is, I'll throw my 2 cents on 5. That is so subjective, it's not even worth arguing. So it comes down to 1 and 3. And I think you can make a strong argument for 1. So for me personally, I'm down to 3.
To talk to us about 3.
So, I mean, in a sense, I mean, I keep coming back to, I go back to my Jeff Crick thing every time that I'm thinking about what I'm doing with 3. Is it impossible to use the property for conforming use? And I mean, unnecessary hardship. I would say no, but at the same time, what we're talking about here is just incredibly, it's a sliver of the deck. It's just hard. I want to make it work. I'm hoping you guys get me there. Because we see these all the time, guys, where this is 3 and it's a stretch. A big stretch. And this one, I don't want to say it's a rounding error, but it's almost a rounding error.
And staff will correct me if I'm wrong. You know, fast forward, so let's see, this house was built in 2007, so we're 12 years on. You know, in another 10 years, and this is a wood deck, right, just a regular wood deck, and the applicant's indicating yes. So now we've got a deck that's at the end of its useful lifespan and needs to be replaced. I mean, essentially, the applicant can't replace this deck as is. I mean, it's not in conformity.
That's correct.
And I'm just completely annoyed because we have a builder that's essentially put the owner, not essentially, has put the owner in a bad spot. And we have an inspector that went out there, and because this isn't some glaring variance from the permit that was pulled and whatnot, you know, just it slipped by. It just, you know, it's only off by 48 inches at its worst spot. And now we have a property owner sitting here that this property is actually, it's been revealed to her, it's actually diminished in value as we sit here.
There's no liability associated.
Because she can't improve the property, you know, the way she wants and the way maybe some of her neighbors have been able to. And for that matter, when this deck reaches the end of its useful lifespan, she's not even going to be able to replace it as is. She's going to have to replace it and chop off, you know, anywhere from 24 to 48 inches off of it to get it into compliance with our code. And that's not right.
I'll make a motion if we're at that point, just to get the conversation going.
I think to add on to that, a potential hardship would be due to that, the delay of any repair in the future might lead to like a potential risk or potential harm where the deck is way past its life, but because it's some sort of weird thing that's like psychological preventing you, like, I don't want to go through the headache of replacing this thing. You now have rotten boards or something like that, and it becomes a safety issue. So, a safety hardship.
I appreciate the comment, and I'd be happy to make a motion at the appropriate time.
I would entertain one.
I would move that we approve the variance based upon the application meeting the 5 conditions outlined in section 201309 G1.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Motion passes.
Motion passes. All right. Thank you very much. All right. We will now move on to item Item 3. Good grief.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Luke Mortensen, and as Mr. Clark just noted, item number 3 tonight is a request to consider a variance from the restrictions for development in the regulatory floodway as expressed by section 20-1204 of the code for a replacement of a park shelter in Bertram Park, and that's at 200 Indiana Street. And so I will briefly just remind you guys, part of your duty as Board of Zoning Appeals is you hear cases from the floodplain management regulations. So I will go through our normal 5 criteria, and then we have our additional criteria specific to floodplain requests, floodplain and floodway requests. So the floodplain management regulations regulate the type of development that may occur in the FEMA mapped regulatory floodway. Those structures that are allowed in the floodway are as follows: flood control and stormwater management structures, road improvements and repair, utility easements, rights of way, and public improvements or public structures for bridging the floodway. So the request at hand is to replace an existing park shelter that is obviously none of those structures. So the subject structure, as it exists today, is an open-air covered shelter, no walls. Staff could not find a building permit for the structure. It's unlikely, or it's possible one was never issued at that time. But historic aerial imagery and some staff knowledge from the Parks Department, we kind of landed on the very early 1980s, possibly 1980 or 1981. This would have been very near the time that the city adopted FEMA's flood insurance rate maps in 1981. So the structure is unique in that it meets our land development code's definition of a structure, but it is not considered a structure by FEMA. So FEMA defines a structure as a walled and roofed building that is principally above ground. So the proposed shelter and the existing shelter, they just have posts, there's no walls, there's no finished floor, as there's no finished or conditioned spaces. Its unique design allows floodwaters to move through the space without restriction or raising the base flood elevation. So, as always, notice was provided to property owners within 400 feet. We didn't get any phone calls or inquiries on this item. And the existing shelter has gotten, hasn't had any adverse impacts on surrounding property owners over the course of its lifetime. Staff believes strict adherence to the code may constitute an unnecessary hardship. Requiring compliance with the floodplain, or floodway, development restrictions would restrict the applicant's ability to fully utilize Bircham Park's passive recreation use designation. So that passive recreation use comes from, it's our code designated use for the site. And the shelter is accessory to that use. Without the shelter, the applicant is unable to accommodate its normal park activities. Those activities make up that passive recreation use designation, and like I mentioned before, that's a code compliant use. Staff believes requiring the applicant to comply with the development restrictions that are intended for walled buildings for true FEMA designated structures is an unnecessary hardship. Staff does not believe the proposed variance will affect our public health, safety, morals, order, convenience, prosperity, or welfare. It'll be located a considerable distance from the Indiana Street right-of-way. Staff doesn't believe it will create any spillover effects, and it won't have any adverse effect on the small bit of floodplain that exists in the Pinckney neighborhood around it. The shelter won't cause a rise in flood elevation. Its design, construction, and materials will likely be safer than what exists there today. So the intent of the floodplain management regulations and the floodway development restrictions are to ensure development is reasonably safe from flooding and to prevent any rise in the elevation of the base flood. So the proposed shelter's materials, like I've mentioned, allow water to move through it, and their very makeup won't be negatively or adversely affected by the floodwaters. More specifically, the proposed shelter is in line with the role of the regulatory floodway. So the floodway moves the waters with the highest velocities. These are the floodwaters that have the greatest chance for hazardous debris or materials. So the shelter that the applicant is proposing, it allows those waters to move through it, and because it can move through it, there is less likelihood of material or debris accumulating, causing a backup in the water, causing the base flood to rise or push out into the floodplain. Finally, the proposed shelter is not opposed to the intent of the open space zoning district, so that's the zoning designation for the park. The open space district promotes development that enhances and protects existing natural amenities and open spaces. So obviously the existing and the proposed shelter, they activate Bircham Park, they bring people down to the riverfront without adversely affecting the floodway or the surrounding open space. So that kind of sums up our 5 normal criteria, and I will try to briefly go through the remaining criteria just because a lot of them are similar points. Going back to the design and the materials, the the proposed structure is meant to be flooded. It will not cause a rise in the base flood elevation. And like I mentioned before, keeping the existing structure may actually pose a greater threat to the surrounding area. It's 40 years old. The materials are beginning to deteriorate. The proposed shelter and the picnic tables will be adequately anchored to the ground. How that is, those actual anchorage techniques, they'll be reviewed and approved by development services staff during the building permit phase. The existing shelter and its location are important to the community. It provides shelter from inclement weather and activates the riverfront, and this will be an even safer amenity to the public. One of the criteria that the floodplain specific is if this space is necessary for the proposed use. And so placing the shelter in an alternative location would restrict the applicant from using existing sidewalks, parking area, connection to the KU boathouse. If you placed it out of the floodway and put it into a portion of the park that is just in the floodplain, there's potential to remove mature trees. It would be closer to the railroad right-of-way and the water treatment plant. Also, as you guys are well aware, the floodplain is the area where the floodwaters slow and they begin to infiltrate into the ground. And so removing some of that floodplain would probably be discouraged. Number of public and private infrastructure lines are already located in and throughout Bertram Park. One of the criteria is our government service costs following a flooding event going to rise. Those costs would already be there. They would have already been accrued. There is infrastructure in Bertram Park right now. Staff believes flood insurance rates will remain commensurate to existing rates. Since it's not a FEMA-defined structure, it could not be insured on a flood insurance policy. Which is a difference from some of the previous floodplain variances you guys have seen. So to wrap everything up, the proposed shelter will not restrict the flow of the regulatory floodway, and it won't cause a rise in the base flood elevation. So based off the findings as presented in the staff report, staff recommends the board grant the variance from the restrictions on development in the regulatory floodway to replace an existing park shelter within Bertram Park at 200 Indiana Street. The applicant is the Parks and Rec Department through the city. They're working with Paul Werner to take care of this. So the applicant's representative is here tonight.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
Just confirming the color representation, image 7, shows playground equipment, but in fact what you're really talking about is picnic tables. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
And
The structure is the main point.
And the structure, just out of curiosity, requires a building permit?
Yeah, we were speaking to Adrian in our development services department, and what they're going to be looking at is there's effects of buoyancy, there's effects of the hydrostatic pressure, kind of above my pay grade, but there is a building permit component to this.
Okay. All right, thank you. At this point, we would like to hear from the applicant or representative this evening.
Good evening. My name is Joy Ray with Paul Werner Architects. Lucas covered most of it, but I just wanted to add that he did in the end say it's just the picnic tables that we're dealing with under the shelter. So no playground equipment in that area right now. And mostly I just think Parks and Rec is really excited about taking that older shelter and really just beefing up the look of that park and making it a place that people are more excited to come to. Even mentioned, you can see it from I-70, and it's just something they want the city to be proud of in that area, and just replace what's already there. When it comes to the building permit issues, we are, if you guys see fit to approve the variance this evening, have a soils engineer ready to go out and bore into the soil to find out what kind of soils we're dealing with and what kind of footings we need to keep it from floating down the river. We don't want that to happen. So we're definitely looking at the engineering aspect of it as well to make sure that hopefully it's better than the one that's there now.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? All right, thank you very much. All right, at this time, we will open up the public portion. Any public comment? You're welcome to come up. All good? Okay, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to close the public portion.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right, any discussion this evening on this one?
Make a motion if,
I would love to entertain a motion.
I would move that we approve the variance from the floodway restriction for development in the regulatory floodway as required by Section 20-1204B of the City Code at 200 Indiana Street.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. All right, at this time, we will hear from Luke staff again on item number 4 for 2 variance requests at 821 Michigan Street.
Good evening again, everybody. Correct, item number 4 tonight is a request to consider these 2 variances from the density and dimensional standards of section 20-601 of the Land Development Code. The first variance request is to reduce the minimum lot area required to support a second dwelling unit in the RM 12D district from 7,260 square feet to 6,350 square feet. The applicant is also seeking a variance to reduce the required lot width and lot frontage amounts for a lot in the RM 12D district from 60 feet to 50 feet. So the variance request arises from the applicant's desire to establish 2 dwelling units with a duplex use within a newly constructed structure on the subject property. So Article 6 of our code, expresses the city's density and dimensional standards. The RM12D district, which stands for multi-dwelling residential duplex, requires a minimum lot area of 7,260 for 2 dwelling units. And then duplex use is a permitted use in the district. So moving on to our first criteria, both the lot and the previous detached dwelling that existed at that site came into existence prior to adoption of zoning in Lawrence, which, as you know, came about in 1927. The lot was platted and recorded in 1871, and the previous structure was built in 1910. The lot has existed in its current configuration under every single adopted zoning code. Over time, the lot could have supported 2 dwelling units from 1949 to 1966, and then more recently from 1973 to 2006. However, since the adoption of the current land development code, the lot area is inadequate to support 2 dwelling units. The current code only allows for 1.7 dwelling units when you do the math, even though the RM12D district permits that duplex use. So the configuration and the character of the lot have not changed since its creation in 1871. The zoning and the lot area requirements have. As you read in the staff report, in 2018, staff provided incomplete information to the applicant regarding his ability to place that 2 dwelling unit structure at the site. We were not able to determine the subject property didn't have that correct amount of square feet until the existing structure had been demolished and he had submitted for his new structure. That's when we caught this. So staff also explored potential minor subdivisions with adjacent properties to establish the proper lot area. However, once you begin shifting those lot lines in that neighborhood, you increase some existing nonconformities or you encumber existing structures. So the lot's platted configuration, including the width and frontage amounts, are results of the original platting in 1871, and they've existed in that manner since. The applicant did not create this unique situation where the zoning allows 2 dwelling units, but the lot is too small to support them. So, as always, property owners within 400 feet were notified. Between the time of writing the report and tonight, we had an adjacent property owner call and supported the applicant's request. As you can see in the staff report, the western side of Michigan Street is mostly comprised of lots with at least 2 dwelling units on them. That side of the block kind of serves as a buffer, kind of a transition zone between the higher density uses up west on 9th Street and then the detached dwelling uses kind of Old West Lawrence. So like I mentioned, it's kind of a transition zone. Staff believes strict adherence to the code may constitute an unnecessary hardship on the applicant. The existing lot area requirements and use restrictions of the RM12D district and the platting that occurred prior to any adopted land development code may make it impossible for the applicant to establish a conforming by right residential use. So the applicant cannot establish a 2 dwelling unit structure due to the inadequate lot area, and he also can't establish by right a detached dwelling, a single family house. In the RM12D district, you can only do that in this case with a approved special use permit. So that's a discretionary process that requires city commission approval. It's not a by right use. As you're aware, the board cannot take into consideration financial arguments. However, it's difficult to see what type of by right productive land use the applicant could establish without a variance or discretionary approval. The applicant cannot adhere to density and dimensional standards that were established after the platting of his lot. Staff does not believe the proposed variance will adversely affect the public. The proposed structure will be totally contained within the lot, and he'll work with both planning and development services staff to ensure that remaining density and dimensional standards like off-street parking, setbacks, building coverage on the lot, that all those items are compliant with the code. Finally, staff believes the applicant's variance is not opposed to the general spirit of the code. The RM12D district is a district intended for duplexes and attached dwellings. The applicant's proposed structure conforms to the specific use standards for the district. And the intent of the code is to provide landowners with a reasonable use of their land that came into existence legally, but it doesn't comply with the adopted code. So approving the reduced lot area, the lot width, and the lot frontage amounts will allow the property owner to use his site productively and moving it towards conformance with the code. It'll equalize the development process for the applicant and allow him to use his property in a manner that's similar to the rest of the zoning district and then the adjacent properties. And to clear up a few items, just because I thought these questions might arise, Catherine did such a good job last month discussing what you guys can and can't hear. And so this is not a use variance. Like I said, the duplex use is permitted in that district. We are looking at the lot area requirements, which are in Article 6, and of course you guys can rule on that. And then also, you don't always see variances from lot width, lot frontage, that kind of thing. Usually when there's a variance for that type of item, it's during the platting or the replatting phases. And so that would be done with the Planning Commission. But because there's no lot line shift or subdivision happening, again, it's coming from 6, which is something you guys can hear. So in conclusion, based off the findings as presented in the staff report, staff recommends the board grant the variance to reduce the required lot area for 2 dwelling units in the RM12D district from 7,260 square feet to 6,350 square feet at 821 Michigan Street. Staff also recommends the board grant the variance to reduce the required lot width and lot frontage amounts for a lot in the RM12D district from 60 feet to 50 feet at 821 Michigan Street. So the applicant and owner is here tonight, and we both can stand for questions.
Any questions for staff? All right, thank you very much. At this time, we'd like to hear from the applicant.
Sure. Rod Lang, thank you for your service and time for everyone here. About 25, 30 years ago, I bought this old white house. My dad owned the one next to it to the left, Mom and Dad, and we tore down that house and built a duplex on just right to the left on theirs. And with the White House, when I bought it, I was able to build a duplex on the right side. And all I'm looking to do from the original plan of 25 years ago is put one in the middle now. Same thing, they look the same, and progress from there. Codes change, but I think that y'all need to take a look at, you all are wanting infill development. As a home builder, I understand that, and I'm all for it. But there are going to be situations in town here, code-wise, where people are going to buy stuff. I mean, I've had this for a long time, but buy for a particular use, and the zoning of it, only to find out they can't do anything with it. I wish there was a way to amend to bring in uses of smaller lots like this that were, you know, platted over 100 years ago. From that, I hope you grant my variance for me so I can get rocking and rolling on it. I'd like to get finished before August 1. You know what August 1 means in Lawrence, Kansas. And I tore the old house down. It isn't so much that you like to tear a house down, but it was a money pit. I mean, it was an old farmhouse that had been added on to for the kitchen and the breakfast, and then added on to again for a hot water tank, washer, dryer, then added on to again for a bathroom, because I don't think it had a bathroom. And there's no way to insulate those old ones without just completely ripping stuff apart around the outside and re-siding it and going through it with new windows. And the foundations are always all rock, so they're crumbling anywhere you pull a rock out, the next one falls off. And then the tenants that I would get, because it was an old piece of junk house, would end up with cheaper rent, but the gas bill would be higher than the rent. I mean, it was time for it to go. And I finally got an opportunity, loan-wise, and to make something happen, and I wanted to get, oh my God, really, in trouble here with asking for a variance. So if you could grant that, I'd really appreciate it.
All right, any questions for the applicant?
I'm not sure if this is a question for the applicant or for the staff. Why are we going a variance route as opposed to just changing to a zoning classification that might support this type of structure without a variance? Is there an RM category that would
So
allow this?
It's difficult to make statements on zoning without doing the full analysis. I think this would have been the first step, and if he would have liked to continue, we could have looked at the rezoning as the next step, but you would have had to rezone to a higher intensity multi-dwelling district, and that would have required that higher intensity to creep further up the street, further up Michigan Street, and it would have allowed 3 units or 3.5 units. You know, that is something we would look at during the analysis phase. So when we learned about this, this was the way of accommodating the applicant's proposed 2 dwelling units without creating a situation where we're changing the block, changing the zoning, changing how many units more extreme could be there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, at this point, we'll open the public portion of the meeting. Seeing that no one else is here this late, I'd entertain a motion to close.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. All right, any discussion?
I would make a motion if there's no discussion.
No, I just think this is a great direction, great project. So
Agreed.
move.
I move that we approve the variance to reduce the required lot area to support a second dwelling unit in the RMD 12D zoning district from 7,260 square feet to 6,350 square feet. And we grant the variance to reduce the required lot width and lot frontage amounts from 60 feet to 50 feet at 821 Michigan Street, based upon the findings in the staff report concluding that the request meets the 5 conditions outlined in section 20-1309G1.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Your motion carries.
Can I say something about the thing that happened earlier, since y'all get ready to leave, am I allowed to do that?
We still have to complete the meeting.
We will wrap up the meeting.
Okay.
My agenda's still a little screwy here. I think that concludes all the items. Are there any other announcements for the board this evening?
No, we don't have any miscellaneous items, and at this point, and our deadline is tomorrow at 3, we don't have any December items
For sign or
for
for?
sign or Board of Zoning Appeals.
Okay.
Would the deferred item possibly be on the December agenda?
The applicant has indicated that they are
January.
looking to go on January.
Okay.
And then we also, Randy has agreed to do coma training in January.
All right. Well, with that pleasant news, I would entertain a motion to close tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Good job.